This is our interview with Senator Audrey Langworthy. When did you serve? How long have you served in the Senate, and from what year to what year?
I have served now 6 years. This is my 7th year. I began in 1984.
Okay. And you started out in the Senate. Can you tell us a little something about your first election? I know you were elected and not appointed the first time.
Correct. Yes, I ran for election in 1984. I had, prior to then, been on the Prairie Village City Council for about 3 years. I had people come to me and urge me to seek a higher office, so I began by looking into it, checking out the House race. The incumbent was Rex Hoy, and who had been there quite some time, and people kept saying, oh, I think he might retire. The people who had really come to me were urging me to run for the Senate, and they were urging me to run against Norman Garr, who had over the years fallen from favor because of his personality and his manner of being very hard driving, ruthless, and difficult to get along with. And so that's the reason people came to me. They knew I was interested in politics, and my husband had expressed to people that he would not mind me becoming more involved in politics, and especially at the state level. So I looked into both houses, mainly because I thought it'd be kind of dumb to run against an incumbent if there was going to be an open seat for the House. But I called Rex Hoy, and he didn't get around to returning my phone call for maybe 6 weeks, and by that time I had moved ahead and had decided that I would run against the incumbent Norman Garr, who had been in office 20 years and had been unopposed for 16.
Now what month was this and what year when you made your decision to run?
Okay, I actually made my decision early, which was very helpful. I was talking to people in December of '83, maybe as early as November, December, and that was important. It was an important part of the process, as far as you don't just go into something without talking with the other players around and people whose opinion you respect, and people who know the opponent, and so on and so forth. In fact, I had several legal-sized tablet pages. People kept saying, oh, you need to talk to so-and-so. You need to do. So I was on the phone a lot, calling and trying to ascertain whether this was a smart move or not. Most people that I called said, oh, it'd be great if you do it, but it won't be easy.
Mm-hmm.
And they always had that kind of disclaimer, oh, you ought to do it, or it'd be great if you do it, but it won't be easy. It'll be a hard race, and it'll be an unpleasant race. And then I would have some people, then I'd say, well, can I count on you to help me? And got yes from some people, and others they'd say, oh, well, I'd sure like for you to win, but I can't help you. I know Norman Garr, or he's my lawyer, or I do bond work with him, or he's helped me in the legislature, or helped our firm or our corporation, and he's done good work for us, and therefore we won't be able to help you. But in the end, I did decide, and I did announce that I was running right about Kansas Day, in January. And I kind of went around at the Kansas Day festivities and introduced myself and said that I was going to run for the Senate.
Now, over 20 years, he would meet a lot of people and probably be asked to do a lot of things, and so he knew a lot of people. Who were the people who supported you and encouraged you to run? Were they from a group that you had worked with before, an organization?
Well, the people that I initially called were people like the mayor of Prairie Village and the past mayor, and then people who were active in the Republican Party at that time or had been involved and active and kind of knew the key players in the county. Some of these people I did not even know very well, but I would go ahead and call them and talk with them, and it was very helpful in terms of making those contacts, I think. But the important people who got me elected were people I worked with over the years. Of course, it didn't hurt that I had been raised right there, had gone to grade school, high school, and the fact that then I'd been at KU and then came back to my same community, essentially. So I had all those contacts, plus then I had spent my early years, first I taught school for 2.5 years, but after that I just spent my time in the volunteer sector while Asher and I raised our children, and so I was very involved with our daughter's PTA, school PTAs at Highlands Grade School, Indian Hills Junior High, and Shawnee Mission East. And the other part of my time I had spent in other volunteer activities, most specifically the Junior League of Kansas City, Missouri. And I think I worked in the league 12 to 14 years, something like that, and I had started out, my first big chairmanship was at the thrift shop, which is where you meet everyone in the whole league because everybody has to be down there to help. And I was chairman of that and did some other chairmanships and then became president of the league. And so all those people are very committed, very involved, and so I can remember saying, never underestimate, after I won, never underestimate the power of the Junior League and the PTA, because those are the people, most of whom had never worked for a candidate before.
Totally non-political, willing to work for you.
Right. They were willing to do anything, walk door to door with me in their neighborhood, and send postcards, whatever. So that was a
So
very
your
important
nucleus,
base.
Were they mainly women that
No, not necessarily.
they were associated with those two?
Right. Maybe they were the husbands. And of course, Asher was born and raised here, and and he is 4 years older than I am, so he had some different contacts, just a slightly different age group. And his parents and my parents have lived here all their adult lives. So
A lot of people you
So-
were in contact with.
right.
Well, you said you were a Republican, and why are you a Republican? How long have you been affiliated with the Republican Party?
Well, I guess the natural answer for that is my parents were Republicans, and I never considered being anything else.
And Asher's a Republican?
Asher's a Republican, although he comes from a split family. His father was a Republican. He was born and raised in Atchison. His brother, who's older, 2 years older, is a Republican, but his mother was a very staunch Democrat, and that came from her background. Her father and uncle were very active in the early days of development of Olathe, and they were Democrats, and they Olathe at that time was a very Republican town, and they had they had a bank because the bank, they started a bank because the bank in Olathe was a Republican bank and didn't want to do business with them. It was very interesting. I wish I had it more in depth, but they founded a newspaper because the Olathe newspaper wouldn't take their ads for their lumber yards that they had, and so they founded their own newspaper, own bank, to take care of of their needs and others because they were Democrats. And, Asher's, I'm digressing here, maybe you don't want all this, but Asher's grandfather later did run for the Senate, and at one point was the only Democrat in the Senate, and
only Democrat?
but he was able to get legislation through, so he was well liked. And then he ran for governor in 1913 and was elected governor in 1913 and only served one term, but he was, I believe, the second Democratic governor in the history of the state.
That's real interesting. Well, we'll talk about the family a little bit later, but I want to remember to do that.
I've lost the question here.
No, that's okay. We're all right. You've talked about how you decided to run and everything, but you've really not located a reason.
Okay.
Why?
Well, we'll have to go back a little bit, I guess. I had been doing volunteer work most of the time. My daughters were getting into senior high. One was getting close to graduating. I took a career development course within the junior league where you kind of analyze what you want to do with your life. And it ask a lot of questions, and there's things to fill out, and then you kind of ponder this and that. And I was at a point where I was beginning to think, what am I going to do with my life now that children are about raised, and am I just going to spend the rest of my time? Am I going to get a paying job, get involved in something I knew I did not want, was not interested in going back to teaching school. I was more interested in my master's is in educational psychology and guidance, and I did think about doing something with counseling, especially college-bound students for schools. But at any rate, I got to thinking about that. Actually, politics kind of came out in some of these questions. But I don't know whether that was because Asher and I had both kind of decided that we really didn't know who we were voting for, and so we had made the decision that we really needed to do a little volunteer work for the Republican Party and kind of get involved and meet some of the people and so on. So which we did. Asher had worked for Larry Wynn some because he had been a home builder, but kind of my first big race to get involved in was to work for Jan Myers when she ran for the U.S. Senate. And I'm thinking back, could that be like 1978?
79.
Could be. And so I spent a lot of time in the office working for her and helping out. She did not win that primary.
Okay, yeah, it'd be 78.
78, yeah. But
that's right.
After, in fact, Norman Garr was in that race, and Jan and Nancy Kassebaum. Well, Nancy Kassebaum won, and the next morning we had a call from some of the Kassebaum people saying, we'd like for you and Asher to be co-chairman of Prairie Village for Nancy Kassebaum. And I kind of sat there thinking, gosh, I'm still feeling badly because Jan Myers had lost. And although we had gone to several events for Nancy and had been very impressed with her, so after talking it over, we did decide to continue with this, and so then we got even more involved.
I see.
And I think that's important in the fact when you're making up your mind to run. I mean, I cannot imagine somebody cold going up and filing and running for office without having ever been involved in working in the party. 'Cause subsequent to that, then I got more involved, worked in other people's races, then I went on to the Prairie Village City Council in about 81, but that was partly because I'd been involved and gotten to know people, and so it was kind of a natural thing. In fact, I got called and asked to submit a resume because there was a vacancy, and
well, were you appointed then to the City Council the first term, and were you elected?
Then I had to run for election. Actually, I have to backtrack. I did apply for a vacancy and didn't get it the first time.
Oh, I see.
There was a death, and the mayor appointed the widow of the fellow who had died. But I had applied at that time, and then the next couple of years, I kind of forgot about it, and then I got a call and said, we've got another vacancy. Why don't you turn in your resume? And by that time I was thinking, oh, I'm not really sure I want to do this now because I'm involved in other things. But I went ahead and did it, and was asked to, they appointed me, and then I had to run the next year because you have to run in the next immediate election to fill an unexpired term. Prairie Village at that time did have a partisan government, so I did have to declare as a Republican. So, since then, just about a year ago, they went to nonpartisan. But so I did run as a Republican, but I was never opposed. So I didn't.
You didn't really campaign then?
I didn't. I did some door to door, and I sent out some postcards, but I didn't send out postcards to everybody. I just.
Well, how did you run for your first election? What were some of your, how did you campaign? What were some of the things you did? Well, I suppose you did in your second one, too, the same type of thing.
Right.
I know you had a very vigorous campaign.
I did. They've both been vigorous, although the first one, was really kind of scary at times because he was certainly knowledgeable, articulate, able person. He did have this, what I would call a personality flaw, in that he held grudges and was very vindictive and made himself very unpopular. And the press loved him because he gave all kinds of caustic comments to the press, and so he wasn't in the press a lot, but he, during the time he was majority leader, he caused a lot of enemies by working very closely with the Democrats, and saw that because of his powerful position, he could maneuver things, and so the Democrats got a lot of their agenda passed with the help of Norman, and that offended the Republicans. And this is when it was a 19 to 21 close Senate House. So with himself and another person, they were able to do some things that did not sit well with the Republicans, and so he lost his base of support, and that's actually where partly came back. Other Republican senators from the Johnson County area came to me and said, would you please try to unseat Norman?
Well, now, you did a lot of person-to-person, door-to-door type campaigns, a lot of signs.
The key thing, at least for me, was finding a really able person to chair my campaign. And I was very fortunate to...
Who did you, I can't remember.
Her name is Carol Pendleton.
Oh.
And actually, she was not a close friend of mine. In fact, I didn't know her well, and I never would have thought to have asked her. But my friend Sue Weltner, who was on the city council and who had run for mayor against a man and had won in a primary race. Carol had been her campaign manager, and so
she had experience in.
So she had experience, and plus Carol had worked in other campaigns, and had always, she and her husband had always been kind of involved themselves. But she was not someone I knew well, but we're best friends now, let me tell you. And she has helped me with both my campaigns, and I genuinely feel that she's spent almost as much time on both of them as I have. But she helped organize it. I did have a kitchen cabinet of knowledgeable individuals who could advise me strategically. You ought to put out this kind of a mailing now. You ought to do that now.
How many people were in that group?
Let's see, about 5.
Oh, well, that wasn't huge numbers. Just
no.
And then you had a lot of workers, though.
And then I had a lot of workers.
Every
my goal has been in both elections. It's never possible, but I still work towards it, is to get someone designated as a block chairman on every block. And it works in some areas where I know a lot of people. It breaks down in areas that are, well, where the voting is not very strong, and areas that tend to be more democratic and more transient. Yeah.
Did you use the media very much in your campaign?
Not really. Do you mean by television?
Did you get on television or radio?
No. I did do some radio ads both times, but television, the Kansas City market is so expensive because you have to pay for the entire metropolitan area, and we're only one tiny
There weren't cable stations, targeted areas like that.
No, the only thing I did do is I think it's in '84, I think we put on the radio, on the Weather Channel,
I see.
what do they call it, a ribbon or a tab line that just kept running across every so often. It'd say vote for Audrey Langworthy, 7th Senate District, or something like that. That's been the extent of my television advertising.
You use the newspapers?
I do newspaper ads and direct mail.
Direct mail's your main.
Direct mail and lots of door-to-door. I try to get out as much as I can.
You had signs up everywhere, too.
And then signs. Actually, in '84, there weren't as many signs because at that point in time, both Mission Hills and Prairie Village had ordinances against signs. The legal counsel for Prairie Village convinced the city that was probably unconstitutional, so they did pass a law right after the '84 election allowing each yard to have 1 yard sign.
One.
So you can only pick out your one candidate. Mission Hill still does not allow yard signs. So yes, yard signs have become more important, and I think are an important part of a campaign. But I relied most heavily on mailings, especially in the '84 election.
Now, it was Asher's grandfather that was in the Senate? Okay.
George Hodges.
Do you think that, I don't get his name. Did you think that influenced you in any way, having had a...
No, but it influenced Asher.
Okay.
So, I never did meet him. He died before I met Asher, and so, but he was brought up frequently in family discussions. And Asher was a political science major in college and had a natural interest in politics, and he has always been wonderful at encouraging me to, or pushing me ahead, or giving me an opportunity to get involved with whatever, and giving me full support for it. So I think he actually, he would like to run for office, although he says he doesn't have the right personality for it. So I would say that probably he puts the seed in the back of my mind that maybe I should do it.
There wasn't any other family member or friend or anybody that
And no one on my
had
side
been
of the
in.
family. Mm-mm.
And your district then hasn't changed yet over the elections. You've had the 2 elections.
It
So
will
it's-
change a little bit.
Mhm.
But
Have
it's
you lost
fortunate.
some-
No, I'll gain a little bit
Mm.
more of Overland Park.
Mm.
Actually,
What is your district? Can you describe it further?
yes.
general
It's state line on the east from 47th Street, which is the Wyandotte Johnson County line. It's also the line for Kansas line. And south, I do not have any of Leawood, which is on the border too. So the district swings around at about approximately 83rd Street, around Leawood, but goes to 95th Street, which is the ending border for Prairie Village. And then it goes back up Knoll, and then jogs over to Lamar for space, because that's what Prairie Village does. And then back to Knoll, and then out 63rd Street I have one precinct of Merriam, which is where Antioch Park is, and goes over to Antioch and back up to 47th Street. So it includes the area where Shawnee Mission North is. So I have 2 high schools in my district. I have Shawnee Mission North and Shawnee Mission East.
How many representatives districts are included in that?
Well, there are 3 totally within side, but there have been 6 that have had parts of them. I think I've lost 1 now due to redistricting, so I think there are only 5 that have parts of my district.
Okay, when you were elected, what issues were important to people in your district, and what have remained issues that are important in the district?
Gosh,
Or are there any?
Well, the main issue in my '84 election when I was campaigning was it's time for a change, which isn't necessarily creative, but because he had been unopposed for 16 years, one of his downfalls was that he had kind of relied upon his caustic comments in the newspaper to keep his visibility up, and he hadn't had to campaign very hard in elections, and there had been a lot of turnover. And so when I was going door to door, a lot of people, many people would say, gosh, I really don't know who my senator is, which was always encouraging to march on to the next house. It made you feel good that you were getting some visibility. So that was the major issue of the time. It was, and it's always difficult when you're ousting an incumbent to try not to get personal. And I was trying to campaign for myself and be a positive candidate, and trying not to put my opponent down all the time. But occasionally, you could hardly help it, because people would say, well,
That's what
people would wonder why I would be better than the incumbent.
And did they ask you then, or?
They would ask me then, and then I would have to try in a nice way to say that he had been ineffective because he was no longer working for the good of and working with his colleagues for the betterment of the state, that he had his own agenda and he had offended people, and therefore he could not get anything done.
Well, and in '84, there were, the issues were different that were before the legislature. There wasn't the big tax movement problems, etc. What was there?
I
any
don't
issue
really
like that?
remember any huge issue like taxes
Or highways.
or highways. No, I mean, I campained on doing more
How
for
about his attendance
education.
record? Was that an issue?
His attendance record was a bit of an issue also. Yes, he missed quite a bit. Like kind of forgotten that, but I did research that, and he would tend to take long weekends for either business or pleasure.
Then you probably try to have a real good voting record and attendance record to offset that. Has there been any issues now since you've been in the Senate that you've sort of championed or worked hard for, or maybe even sponsored bills for?
Okay. Well, I've tried to work hard for issues that were important to my district, but I did have the opportunity to have a fun experience my very first year due to a good friend, Barbara Burgess, who suggested to me that I attend a meeting with her on the Oregon Trail, and I got interested in what they were doing, and they were feeling like there was a need to have the Oregon Trail get more recognition in the state of Kansas, and the trail be designated as an official trail in Kansas, which it was not, although there were others like Santa Fe and Cimarron and so on that were official. So that was my first piece of legislation, and it was a fun experience. It was not too controversial. We did get a little controversy in the House. The Senate was pretty good about it and didn't give me a hard time on it, which was good because I, being a freshman, a lot of controversy might have made it difficult. But I managed to get it through the Senate and finally through the House, and there was a nice ceremony after the bill signing, and we, as a result of that, got the first signage for the national, from the National Park Service, who had just designed a sign. We got to put up the first sign in the state of Kansas.
Well, that was a kind of a surprise too, to get something passed like that so quickly and get the signs up so quickly.
Yes.
Right.
You want to turn it off for a minute? Hi, Jayne. We can talk all day.
I know, it's just too much
I
fun.
forgot what question we were on.
Well, let's talk about the issue. Getting back to the issues. While you've been in the Senate, are there any issues that seem to sort of be identified as women's issues, and where the women are expected to respond or carry the bill or something like that? I'm thinking of children's issues,
I think
abortion
that
issues.
happens more in the House than it does in the Senate. Most of us on the Senate side have not, well, none of us have a wave a feminist flag. We all show an interest in, say, education, or well, let's see, education, some of the social, especially funding issues on maternal and infant kinds of funding for young mothers and that sort of thing. But we have men who are equally as interested in that. So I really cannot say that there have been any issues that have been labeled women's issues. Now, I can't speak before I came here. I know Jan Myers was considered, she chaired public health and kind of got labeled as being a liberal on some of those issues. But right now, no.
That's interesting. Maybe a change.
It will change. I will say I'm probably the most outspoken for abortion rights. It's not something I really wanted to do, but none of the other women would come forth. Well, we have women on both sides of the aisle who are pro-choice, but on parental consent, for example, one woman has her children are adopted, and it's a difficult issue for her. We have had a Catholic who was pro-choice, but it was difficult for her to be vocal on the issue. And so I finally looked around the room and decided that we couldn't let a couple men who were very good at fighting off abortion legislation do it all the time, and so I decided I had to speak up some. So, but it's not my favorite issue.
Yeah, and it's not been recognized as necessarily a woman's issue by the Senate right now, anyway.
No.
Okay. Just overall, not talking about those issues or any issues in particular, how would you describe your stand if someone were going to label you liberal or conservative or whatever? How would you choose to describe yourself?
I consider myself to be reasonably fiscally conservative. I'm probably on the liberal side as a Republican on social issues.
Yep.
But I believe that also represents my urban, suburban district.
So you feel you're representing them in being that way?
But sometimes I think that some of the other Republicans probably would label me a liberal if they dared to tell me that.
But you get to label yourself.
Right. So I consider myself a moderate.
Okay. As a freshman legislator, did you have a mentor or anyone that sort of gave you advice or helped you get the committees you wanted?
Well, I had a couple of mentors. Fortunately, Bud Burke was elected majority leader, and he is from my area. He'd known him a long time, and he's actually known my husband longer because they went to kindergarten together.
Oh,
and Bud's mother taught my husband Asher how to play the piano. So, and they are the same class. So Asher had known Bud for many years. So Bud did take of course, an interest in me, and had actually had advised me some on my campaign for election. So he was somewhat of a mentor. Because of his new position as being majority leader, I would sometimes go to Senator Gus Bogina, who's the new chairman of Ways and Means, but nonetheless, sometimes it was good to go and talk with him, and he was accessible when maybe Bud would not be. I really did not have a woman mentor, because when I came to the Senate, it was when Jan Myers left. Otherwise she might have been. I came with two other Republican women, Jeanne Hoferer and Alicia Salisbury, and our offices were all right here, three together. It was by accident, but it was wonderful because we were our own support group, and we would do a lot of talking after hours and getting together. And
they've commented on that too. What committees did you serve on, and are you still serving on?
Okay. I began by serving on Energy and Natural Resources. I was made vice chairman of local government. I was on the Judiciary Committee and the Education Committee and Confirmations my first 4 years. And do you want to know what I'm doing now? Now I'm still on Energy and Natural Resources. I am on local government. I'm no longer vice chairman. I am vice chairman of Public Health and Welfare. And I am vice chairman of the Assessment and Taxation Committee. And then I am on the Education Committee, and I chair the Joint Committee on Legislative Educational Planning, which is an interim committee that's a long-range planning committee for higher education. And I now chair the Confirmations Committee.
Now, that interim committee, are you responsible for some of the legislation that I just read about being introduced? Or no, I guess it wasn't introduced, it was just the Board of Regents' suggestion on new formation of a new group, or not formation of a new group, or whatever.
I think maybe you're considering the
complex
of moving the community colleges from the State Board of Education over to the Board of Regents. That was a new proposal since our committee met, or otherwise he may have brought it to us, because he brought several proposals. I will be carrying on in the Senate, assuming it passes, the merger of the Kansas College of Technology at Salina with Kansas State University. That's one of the bills that they came to us about and asked us to support.
That's a busy committee then, isn't it?
It is a busy committee. We tried to get qualified admissions brought out of the LEPC is an acronym for it. But I was short one vote to get the qualified admissions out. I think there are a group of us, just digressing, but there are a group of us in the Senate who are putting together an educational package, and I think we'll put qualified admissions back in that package. So
it'll be interesting to see how that happens and develops. Can you describe the State House power structure during the years that you've been in office? Who are the leaders? You said Bud Burke, and who are some of the leaders as you?
Well, when I first came, we did have a change in leadership. Ross Doyen had been Senate President for 9 years, and I mean, I don't know how everyone voted, but there was a change then, and Bob Talkington became Senate President, and I really respected his leadership my first 4 years. He was kind of a laid-back individual that never really hammered on us too much, except when it was absolutely necessary, but you did not feel pressured at any time. And Senator Burke has carried that out on this side. So we try to be united when we have to, and we try to let people go their own. They try to let people go their own way when it's in their best self-interest. In terms of other power in the Capitol, my first 2 years I was under John Carlin as governor, and maybe because of the issues we were dealing with, I did not disagree with his position on many of the more issues that stand out. And then when we got Mike Hayden, it was kind of interesting. I had really looked forward to, now we can really get some things done, and it didn't work that way. Here you would think someone of your own party it would be easy, but it wasn't easy, and it was difficult actually at times to, although, and I like Mike very much and enjoyed him personally and so on, but it was not an easy time to have a Republican governor, Republican House, Republican Senate. On the leadership aspect as it relates to the House, I will say that there's always been a certain tension between the House and the Senate. I imagine there always has been and always will be. I was sort of surprised when I first got here, but oftentimes the biggest frustration would come not with how the governor feels about an issue, but all the stupid goings on in the House. And the kind of package that they would want to put together, or the unusual twist they'd want to do on a bill, or amend one of our bills, or send us over a bill that was off the wall. But I think that's probably part of the political process.
Probably. What bills have you introduced and sponsored that are kind of memorable, or don't need to list all of them, I'm sure there are a lot, but besides the signing the trail bill.
Why don't you turn it off for a minute? I do have to stop and think.
Okay, what are some bills that you've sponsored, worked for?
Oftentimes, many of the bills, it's easier to get passage out of them if they are considered committee bills. So I don't always feel that I need to be the lead sponsor. I am thinking about that in terms of the future. I may get more gutsy, but anytime you are the lead sponsor on a bill, it takes you hours. It's a very big responsibility. I have been the lead sponsor on a bill that's important to my area called the Bi-State Cultural and Recreational Bill, which was to form a compact between 3 counties in Missouri and 2 in Kansas to form a cultural recreational district with taxing powers of up to a 1/4-cent sales tax for cultural projects, whether it would be the Nelson Gallery or Botanical Gardens in Lenexa, which they want, or the zoo, or whatever. It would be money that would be helpful to strengthening the cultural aspects of the metropolitan Kansas City area. I've been working on that bill for 4 years, and I got it through the Senate last year, and the House didn't let it out of committee. And so it has been completely rewritten again this year, and some people on the House side have put their own stamp and mark on the bill by substantially changing it. And I think are probably going to want to take the credit for it, but nonetheless, it's starting in the House, and if they get it back, I'm sure I can get it through the Senate again. And I'm really hopeful, even though it isn't the bill I wanted, I'm hopeful that we can get that done. I've also been the chief sponsor of a bill called the Community Assistance Bill, which would allow tax credits for businesses who contribute an extraordinary proportion to a not-for-profit agency. And it is passed in Missouri, as did the Bi-State Cultural Bill, and is this community assistance plan of tax credits has been in effect in Missouri for almost 10 years and has been very helpful to many agencies in the not-for-profit sector. And in fact, it hurts agencies on the Kansas side, because when they do a big benefit like the Chiefs, Kansas City Chiefs or the Royals will do a benefit for an agency, they will ask if they are in the, it's called the NAP program in Missouri, Neighborhood Assistance, we were using the word, and they're much more willing to do it where they can get the tax credits, and so there's a little, the agencies on the Kansas side suffer because of it. So I have worked on that for 2 years and have been the lead sponsor for that and spent a lot of time on it. I can't even get it out of the Senate, so that's and I'm not sure I'm even going to introduce it this year. It's an idea whose time will come, but with all the other tax problems, giving away credits right now is not a popular theme. So I would say those are 2 that I probably spent many, many hours trying to educate people on. I have been co-sponsor in terms of bills that make a little splash. The first one, since I'm an anti-death penalty voter, I was a co-sponsor on the Hard 40 bill, which is 40 years without parole, and that's the one that did pass both houses and was signed by Governor Hayden, although he had been a strong death penalty proponent. So, but I didn't spend a lot of time working on that. Another bill that was important, I thought, last year to funding the margin of excellence was a cigarette tax, a 5-cent per pack cigarette tax, and unfortunately, I mean, that made it through the Senate just fine, just died a miserable death in the House. So I know there are a bunch of other bills, but right now they're not totally coming to mind.
Yeah. Well, have you participated in any formal or informal coalitions or groups? I know that there was sort of a group that the press anyway called the Women's Caucus last year. Have you been part of anything like that?
We were invited. That was really organized by the House, and they were feeling that it was important to get together on an informal basis and talk about issues and see if there could be some networking to get legislation that might be of interest to that group moving faster. From the Senate side, we attended more just as, for the social aspect of maybe getting to know the House members better, because we're all so busy up here, there is not time often to get to know other legislators on the House side, period, unless you work with them on an interim committee or a conference committee, which isn't always the best place to get to know someone. But maybe because of our situation now that there are 4 Republican women in the Senate, and we're all here again in the same office.
That's right.
Sheila Frahm, and Lana Olin, and Alicia Salisbury, and myself. So we have our little networking here together, and
more informal.
That's more informal, but we haven't really gotten together with the Democratic women just as a group of 9.
Okay, to change the subject just a little, can you remember anything particularly, what vivid memories do you have of anything particularly? Disaster, victory, whatever, anything that has happened to you either at the beginning or any time during your terms?
Well, I generally try to avoid big disasters.
You try to forget them? Well, if there is anything, you can pop up with it, if you think of anything.
It could have been a big disaster if I'd lost my first campaign, which I didn't.
I think you're right. Most people try to avoid both times.
I would have considered that a great blow, although I had gone into it knowing there was a chance I could lose, but I also got in it to win.
Any humorous situations?
Well,
there's
always a lot of
things,
subtle humor. One thing that is still humorous, even though Alicia Salisbury and I have both been here 6 years, is that some of the men still can't remember who's Alicia and who's Audrey, and we often say, oh, it doesn't matter, we all look alike.
That's good.
So.
Well, now you said that there were some particular. Let's back up a bit. How many women were in the Senate when you first were here?
There were 5 of us.
There were 5, and there are 9.
9 now, after the '88 election.
Do they have any particular special names for the women? Do you remember?
Well, they did when we first arrived in '84. We were referred to as the Skirts, and I really think it was a shock to the senators to have that many women. They were used to 1 or 2, but to suddenly have 5.
Okay, let's get back to the Skirts here.
Okay. We were referred to as the Skirts, although never to our face, but we know that as a group we were referred to. Now we know, well, what do you think the Skirts will think about this? And as I think I said before, I don't really think they knew what to do with this at first. The men had suddenly recognized that we were a growing force in the Senate and in the legislature, I'm sure. But when I arrived, there was no. There's a room off the back of the Senate where you can go and the men go in and smoke cigarettes, or you can eat or something, because you're not supposed to eat on the Senate floor. And there was also a men's restroom, but there was no women's restroom. For us, when we left, well, and see, the restroom and the lounge both had speakers in it so that you could hear what was going on and you know whether you're getting time for a vote or something important was happening. But for us women, we had to leave the chamber entirely, and we'd have to walk out in the front area where all the lobbyists sit around and are kind of listening to what's going on and chatting with one another, and then walk around the corner to use the restroom. So one of the first things that we did do was agitate to get a women's restroom right next to the men's restroom, and I will say it has been an important asset to have. It took about a year to get it done, and there was a little complaining about how expensive it was, but we did remind them that we were here to stay.
Well,
also, we had to put our imprint on it a little bit by asking to be a part of choosing the colors. I mean, there was no automatic, we'd like to have you help with all this. We kind of had to exert our influence to get it accomplished. I'm
not surprised. It was, I think, 1980 before there was more than one woman in the Senate at the time. So. Nate, I'm going to ask you some questions.
Okay, there's just one more thing that it wasn't just said once, but oftentimes we'd get ready to go to committees first thing in the morning or at 1:30 in the afternoon or whatever, or to go to the Senate floor, that Alicia and Jeanne Hoferer and myself would walk out of our office and walk to the elevator or walk up the stairs together as a threesome. And I bet if it was said once, it was said 25 times by one of our male colleagues. Certainly makes me feel nervous when I see the three of you there conspiring. So anytime that there'd be three of us together, there's some little comment would be made, which, of course, if you see three men together, it meant nothing, but to have three women together, they were always worried we were plotting on something.
That's interesting. That's really interesting to think that.
Especially in 1980s.
Yeah, 1980s, 90s now.
Right.
Yes, real, really. Talk about you privately and personally. Are you a native of Kansas?
I call myself a near native. I was born in Grand Forks, North Dakota, and my parents moved to the Kansas City area when I was 2, and to Johnson County when I was about 2 1/2.
Yeah, you're not one of the native sons and daughters except by adoption or something.
Right.
Okay. Can you describe your childhood and your education?
Well, since I was born in 1938 and moved to my first home in Johnson County in 1940, I do have fairly strong memories because of those being war years and growing up in kind of a small neighborhood environment. All the houses that had been built were brand new right before the war. But during those war years, there wasn't much mobility. People were there most of the time. You might take a vacation or something, but because of the war years, the community, everybody was out working in their victory gardens and so on. So you had a nice sense of small community, and you got to know the neighbors really very well, which is not, I don't think, true so much anymore because there's so many more options for people. I attended Hickory Grove Grade School from kindergarten through 8th grade and feel like I got a really basically good education with maybe a few holes here and there. And went to Shawnee Mission High School, which was the only real high school in the northeast part of the county. It was kind of Shawnee Mission and then probably Olathe. And on the Missouri side was Southwest High School. It was the the closest school, and then there was Wyandotte High School. But be that as it may, it was considered an outstanding high school, had national recognition, and I have very good memories of my 4 years in high school.
Then you went on to college?
Then I went on to college and went to Colorado College with two of my friends from high school, and found that to be a good experience, although I will have to say I only spent my freshman year there, and for other reasons decided that I would transfer back to the University of Kansas, where I ended up going for 5 years, even though I'd missed my freshman year there. I stayed on for after I got my undergraduate degree in secondary education. I stayed on to get a master's in educational psychology and guidance, and was the assistant resident director of Corbin Hall, which was a half-time position. So I worked essentially for the Dean of Women's office, half-time.
Okay, can you describe your parents and your childhood home a little bit, which I think you've already done, except you really haven't told us much about your parents.
Okay. Well, my parents were both born and raised in Iowa. My mother was born and raised on a farm, and my father was born in Sioux City, Iowa, in town, so he was a town boy. His parents had both come from Norway. They had come separately and met in Sioux City, but in their early 20s. And he had two half-sisters because his father's first wife had died, but he was the only child of the second marriage, and the only Hanson, and I am an only child, and therefore that strain of that family has ended with me, because the name has ended, because there were so growing up I sometimes was self-conscious about being an only child, but I look back on it and I have to say that probably was not a bad experience for me. I hope I'm not too spoiled, but I know I am some. But the only time I think that really would have been nice to have had a brother or sister is that when I came to the legislature, I'm not really good at fighting battles, verbal battles, and I attributed that to the fact that I didn't have a sibling to argue with. But my parents were very hardworking. My mother did not work when I was growing up. She had taught school, but my father came to Kansas City because he was moved here as the first JCPenney manager, opened the first JCPenney store in Kansas City, which is kind of amazing now, when there are huge JCPenney stores in all the malls everywhere. But he worked in that store most of his years till retirement. And we did have a brief move to Leavenworth. The store was in an area that was kind of turning socially, and so the profits in the store were not as good, and so he was given a choice of where he would like to move to, and he picked Leavenworth because it was close and it was a store that was doing very well. So when I was a freshman in college, actually, my parents had moved to Leavenworth, which was unsettling for me because all my friends were back home, and Leavenworth's only 40 miles away, but it meant me driving in the car a lot and to visit my friends and keep up my contacts. And so those are not my fondest years in terms of, I wasn't home much, but Leavenworth was never really home for me.
Well, did you belong to any organizations or have any experiences in school growing up that you think influenced you or helped you prepare you for holding public office? Besides the ones you've already described as.
Well, there's always, I think, it's not so much clubs or organizations necessarily, but it's ways in which you can develop your own personal strengths and self-esteem and confidence. And probably one of my early experiences that I have always considered significant for me was when I was chosen to be an AFS student and went for the summer of 1955 to Berlin for the summer. And there were 4 of us from my high school that were chosen to go that year, which was, I think, the most ever. This was some reasonably new program. But it was very exciting in that particular time because, as I mentioned earlier, the world seemed bigger back in those days and you didn't do as many things. So for me, this was an outstanding experience. It wasn't necessarily an easy experience. I had some hard times being on my own and being in a foreign city, and a big city, and having trouble communicating with the language and so on. But I survived it, came back, and when you were trying to relate it to the legislature, because this was kind of a new program, we were asked to speak to many different groups, some small, some really very large groups, and it probably was exceedingly helpful to me to be able to share those experiences and stand before people and develop my communicating skills. I did not take debate, and therefore, which I probably should have when you relate back to the arguing, I could have honed my arguments better having done that. But certainly, I know I gave over 20 speeches during my senior year about my experiences in Berlin, and I never had trouble with speech after that.
Mm-hmm. How old were you when you were first elected to the legislature?
Let's see, I must have been about 46.
Okay, and you have your husband. What does he do?
Okay, Asher is in the building business and real estate business. Actually, they are no longer. When I say they, he and his father used to build custom homes. His father's deceased, and he kind of got out of the home building business and is really in the property management business now. So he is his own boss and has some flexibility, which has been very helpful in our lives, because, and especially for me to be doing something like this, he can allow me to do some things. And when I first ran for the legislature in '84, our younger daughter Julia was a sophomore in high school and couldn't drive yet, and we'd always had kind of a carpool. So Asher had to assume the carpool role in addition to doing the cooking and just general taking care of the family duties. And then the following year, we had an AFS student live with us from Australia for the year, so he was taking care of 2 daughters. So he is a great support to me, and not only has he encouraged me, but he's willing to take on additional responsibilities, and which I don't think every man, and even in this day and age, would allow a woman to do, because I am away from home 5 days during the session, and he is on his own.
Now, your daughters were 15 and how old when you were first elected?
Well, I guess 15 and 18, because our older daughter went off to college the fall that I was elected.
Okay, and we asked everyone who cared for your children while you were gone. Did you? I think you told me that. Really, they were too old to need a lot of care, but you lived in Topeka and commuted back and forth
on the weekends.
Okay, so you stayed here 5 days.
Uh-huh.
What do you think, if you could name 2 or 3 things, what helped, hindered, shaped, formed your desire or your ability to be in the legislature? I think we've kind of talked about a lot of things. Can you think of anything real specific there? Maybe there isn't. But if there is, we want to give you a chance to.
It helped or hindered my desire.
Yeah.
Well,
there may be, could be negative and positive things that you had to consider.
Well, I guess I would say that at the point in time when I got to thinking about running for the legislature, it was a point in my life where I was kind of seeking a focus and looking for something to do that I could really be involved in, and whether it was going to be a full-time job or some other major commitment. But I had always kind of gone through life thinking that all of us are put on this earth to make some kind of a difference, and I was looking for something where maybe I could make that difference, and that was kind of a underlying criteria for whatever it was I was going to do. How it ended up in politics necessarily, has to be a number of things, but I do feel like I make a difference here.
Okay, what kind of things do you feel like you make a difference in?
Well, first of all, a lot of the issues we're dealing with very directly impact everybody in the state, and our children, and so on whether it's educational matters or social matters, whatever. And I do feel like in a body of 40 that my voice can be heard. I also feel that I'm willing and have the time. I say that with a little bit of a chuckle, but that I do have time to help individuals.
Good.
I have time for some constituent kinds of services, and I'm close enough to the people. It's not like being on the local school board, but nonetheless, I'm there to help facilitate when oftentimes people have problems with agencies or with the state on matters, and I enjoy being able to see those through to a solution.
Good. Do you think there's been a cost to you and your family for your being in the Senate? And if so, what do you think it's been?
Well, the cost has been, for my husband and I personally, I suppose, is the fact that we're apart for 1/4 of the year, except on the weekends. Usually talk to him on the telephone a couple of times a day. But beyond that, I don't think there has been anything that I would say is negative.
What are the
It's
positive
been helpful.
things,
Actually, I think it has been a very good experience for both our daughters, and I think it shows up in their personalities and in their own personal self-confidence, because even before I ran for office, when I was helping other people, I would take them door to door with me, because people feel more comfortable. There's less of a barrier when you've got a little person with you. But because I have taken them door to door, and then they started going door to door by themselves for me, and being at a lot of social occasions, political receptions, and so on and so forth, they have developed a fairly sophisticated social rapport with people, and I oftentimes have people say, "Oh, they just seem so mature, and they're so pleasant, they make good conversation." I think that has partly come from having to be involved. And you know, I think even when they went off to college and so on, there's a certain pride in whether it's deserved or not. Well, you know, my mother is a senator. I think that has been helpful for them. It's maybe more of a perception than real, but
probably real. Do you think that your being in the Senate has changed how other people see you or treated you or acted towards you?
Somewhat. Not with my friends, necessarily. Coming from where I come from, there are a lot of people with important titles and important jobs and so on. I've noticed that maybe someone who comes from a rural area maybe is considered much more on a pedestal as a person, you know, as being one of the big leaders in the community by the fact of their office than myself, who there's so many, being in a metropolitan area and the uniqueness of the Kansas City area where, you know, I'm just another person who's maybe in political office, but we're not set up on a pedestal as much in an urban area.
It's interesting. Do you think in the past 6 years you've seen any change in the political role of women or the expectations of women in politics?
Well, I think probably still women have to prove themselves more than men do, and to prove that they can handle the job. But I think that's lessening. I really do.
The more numbers.
The more numbers. And just society as a whole, I think there's more acceptance of women being involved in all occupations. So it's not so unusual. I also think that the fact that girls now are able to be involved in sports and be more competitive is bringing on more and more women, and I assume that by the time I retire and sit back a while and watch, there will be a totally new breed of woman in the legislature from what most of us are today, who mostly came out of being like school teachers or housewives, or into this. There'll probably be more women lawyers come to the legislature.
Well, along that line, would you want to guess, or an educated guess, of course, what caused the sudden change in 1975 from prior to that time never being more than 4 women, and ever since 1975 the number of women has increased almost in a sort of a ratio in the House and the Senate? Do you have any? If you can't think of it now, I want you to think about it and call me back.
Okay. Well, it is difficult. I was trying to think back to the times.
You think women ran for office? We haven't had time to really look, since we just found this out, to really see, did they run for office prior to that time and were they defeated? Or, you know, did they not run and then all of a sudden it's just sort of a snowball effect that's occurring, and why?
Again, I guess it has to relate back to kind of society and the changes in society and the fact that women became more participatory in all aspects. It became more okay to get a job.
Okay. You campaigned for Jeanne, probably in, what, 78, you said? Can you think back to that time? How were people accepting her? I mean, she'd been around a long time, even then.
I think they accepted her well, I mean, I think it's nothing new to be saying this, but women who have been in politics have always been considered hardworking and honest.
Good. There maybe are examples. The first women maybe changed things just by the type of people they were and how hard they worked.
But I also think it's the times. There were more, I mean, even on the Prairie Village City Council there hadn't been very many women, and then all of a sudden, but that was partly due to a couple of mayors in succession who, when there were vacancies, were comfortable urging women to run. And I do think that is important, that there are a group of men who have urged women to participate.
It may make all the difference. We're through with this interview officially, but I do know that you're in kind of a special area and that you have a lot of women in political office right now. Can you kind of run through that for us?
Yes, it is kind of interesting. Of course, we have Nancy Kassebaum as our U.S. Senator. We have Jan Myers, who is our Congresswoman from this particular area. And then the press suddenly picked up on the fact that I mean, it's been this way for a little while, but they just kind of picked up on it, that there was now a woman governor in Kansas, and that is new. But then also in this one area, Prairie Village and Overland Park, there is I am the senator, and then the representative is a woman.
And which representative?
Barbara Allen.
Okay.
And that's the only place in the country where you can have that full line of succession. Well, first of all, there aren't very many states that have a U.S. senator, so that cuts out a whole lot. Then to have it match up with a woman governor and a woman congressman, of which there aren't very many in the U.S. Congress either, it tapers off and funnels down very quickly to an area that is totally governed by women. And actually it goes further than that. The county commissioner that represents that area is also a woman.
Okay.
I do want to mention someone that has had some effect on that, and that is Bill Franklin, who is the former county commissioner, former mayor of Prairie Village, and the first one I interviewed with to take on to go onto the city council. He, however, chose the widow. But then he was the one that called me. He was no longer mayor, but he said, you need to go talk to the current mayor now and get appointed to the council, and which I did. He also, he has been a great supporter of Jan Myers all along, and he has supported Sue Weltner. I think he was like her campaign manager when she ran for mayor. He has been very supportive of Barbara Allen, and has always been in either co-chair or something of her campaign. So this is a man who looks for women that can do the job and then encourages them to do it. And
maybe he's a very important key. That's really interesting. That may be an all-time first too, which, I mean, you say you're the only place right now, but I doubt if you can look back very, very far.
It may well be.
It may be the only situation in the United States that's that way.
Actually, that's what they're saying now.
That's great. Is there anything I haven't asked you that you would like to have included in this interview or tell us?
I'll think of it.
After I leave. That's
Why
okay.
didn't I tell Barbara this?
Well, if you do.